long ago, I saw myself as a deeply bonded person, but bonded not in the sense of deep love and affection, but in the sense of feeling trapped by a system that pushed me into conforming to set ways of being and doing. I'm a social anthropologist. I study societies, people, and cultures. 2 years ago, we moved to a small village in Dharamshala with my 2 kids and my husband. Whilst our friends thought this move as a midlife crisis, I was only responding to the findings of my own research. I had turned a subject of my own study, and the anthropological lens had turned inwards. And it was important for me to be able to apply the findings of this study to my own life, to be able to lead a non-dualistic life, a life where there was reduced gap between what I thought and how I acted. I use the words we and our interchangeably with me and mine to indicate that this is a journey which is a joint one that I share with my husband. So what was this journey all about? It was our quest for freedom. What is it that we sought freedom from? To put it quite simply, we were looking to get total control over our life and its direction. We wanted not just to be free, but more importantly, feel free. In 2011, after having spent over a decade living and working abroad, we moved back to India, both for personal and professional reasons. I came back as a tenured faculty in a liberal arts university, whereas my husband continued in a flourishing corporate career. By any standard, life was good. We had always worked and lived in cities because that's where all the action was, that's where our jobs were. And whilst cities had a lot to offer, I felt that accessing anything on a sustainable basis was an uphill task. Distances were huge and traffic was crazy. Our careers chomped away a lot of our time, leaving little avenue or scope to be able to pursue other interests. Early mornings felt like a scramble to leave behind empty homes where we all recongregated towards the evening. Quality time with friends and family was in short supply. It felt like a rationed commodity that we could access only on weekends. In a nutshell, I felt the busyness of our city lives trickle down and invaded into every other domain of our life, over which I had practically no control or very little control, if any. I felt that all of this was like a package deal. You either had all of it or none of it. And with this, I began to question the basic quality of my life and the life choices we were making. In our world, there is one way to be successful and a certain stereotype or a certain notion for success. I too was a product of that socialization. I had been there, done that, and professionally, whilst I felt very accomplished, I still felt hugely unfulfilled. I wanted a saner, fuller life, but constantly felt leveraged and time poor. And with this, I started questioning as to what was real success. Who controls success? Who defines it? Was seeking a wholesome, fuller life meant to be any less successful than one chasing career, fame, or titles? And by wholesome life, I'd like to correct this here, this misconception that we usually have when we use the word balanced and wholesome. By wholesome life, I did not mean a laid-back, retired, lazy life, or a life without ambitions, pursuits, dreams, and goals. It was not about me sitting isolated on a mountaintop trying to do my own thing, disconnected from the rest of the world. No. For me, a wholesome life meant living life on my own terms, wanting to do more, wanting more out of life. Basically, I was just looking for a fuller life. And as I started to challenge the dominant notion of success and sought control, The personal had become political. We needed to reimagine alternative ways to do what we wanted to do, and at a pace that would work for us. I felt our notion of success needed redefining to be able to accommodate, celebrate human diversity, creativity, human interests, and personal preferences. And as we decided to seek control, three things became clear. It was clear that we were no longer willing to have any external control on our time. It became clear that we wanted accountability primarily only to our own selves. It became clear that we were no longer seeking any external validation for our success. This in turn meant that we now had to let go of our careers as they consumed the bulk of our time. It also meant having to let go of the economic security and the sustenance that our jobs and careers provided. And we thought hard and pondered whether this need for the need for time, was this so compelling over money and our careers that we were ready to rock our boats? The fact that we were ready to let go meant that this was not a passing phase or something that the mind entertained from time to time. It was a good idea to sort of, feel good about. The popular advice that we got from friends and family was to stick it out for another decade, or at least till the kids had flown the nest. But by then, life would have passed us by. We wanted more time, and we wanted it in the here and now, with the kids, not without them, and whilst we still had the energy to pursue our dreams. Knowing that no matter how much we prepared, life could still spring surprises at us, helped let go of our fear and insecurity. Money was the other big thing that we needed to process, and money has this uncanny ability to create a dependence. No matter how much one has, it's never enough. The more one has, the more one needs. And whilst it gives a lot of security, from it also stems a certain anxiety and insecurity. We had a lot of inner dialogues that helped us explore the meaning of life and happiness, and helped us arrive at a sense of oneness with our own selves and the choices that we were trying to make. In this letting go, and this also helped us loosen up, and we were more clear that we are now ready to sort of let go. And in this letting go, there was a strange and convoluted realization that somehow less was more. And the less we had, the more we felt free. Having decided to let go of our jobs in the city, it now meant we could choose where we wanted to live. We always wanted to live in smaller, simpler places with fewer distractions. And whilst I would have been equally happy to be in a village in central India or somewhere in remote rural Rajasthan, we decided to move to a small village at the foothills of the Himalayas for our love of the mountains. We had the added advantage of good weather and good air. With the move, there were three elements that still needed handling. And I'm going to try and talk to all three of them. The issue of livelihood, the issue of healthcare, and the issue of education. So first, I'm going to talk about the issue of livelihood. In sort of choosing time over money, I knew we sort of operated from a unique sense of privilege. It was like an elitist stand to be able to take a call to let go of our jobs. And time was more important for us than money. But we were not privileged enough to not have to think about our sustenance. And I was fortunate enough that whilst I was still at the university where I earlier worked, I took a sabbatical in which I asked a very simple, basic question as to what is it that I would do if I did not have to afford my qualifications, earn a livelihood, or chase a career. And Kyo was born out of that sabbatical churning. It's part of a larger vision, and as the person who just introduced me said, it stands for question your own notions. It's a reflective platform for young minds to be able to do self-inquiry, build more self-awareness in the quest to lead more ethical and conscious lives. It has helped us connect our dots. It has reduced tension and conflict and the dilemmas that we earlier had. Kyo has also allowed us to do the work that we like doing at a pace that works for us and from the place that we like. The other thing that I'd like to mention while I still talk about this livelihood bit is that whilst we were in the city, there was an abundance of money that we had because of the kind of careers and jobs that we were part of. But I always felt that with that kind of abundance, there was a certain irreverence that was there in our relationship to money. And I had personally too experienced a certain desensitizing and numbing, even though I felt I was a person who was sort of conscious about money. For instance, spending lavishly on a meal outside was a done thing. And this used to really hurt, and I used to have immense guilt because I felt that this was somebody's half-month's salary in the city, perhaps. We were looking to make more conscious choices in our life and be able to demonstrate these to our children. The move away from the city helped with that too. With our incomes reduced, it now meant that we had to be able to rationalize our needs, be able to separate our needs from our wants and desires. And I did not necessarily see this as a painful downsizing or as a painful compromise, but as a welcome correction. When my son now exclaims on an overpriced brownie on the dessert menu, I actually feel more reassured than sad. It helps that we now have a great work-life balance, that we live out of a beautiful place. Our need for frequent vacations has come down. We eat healthier and dine together as a family for almost all of our meals. Our wardrobe requirements have come down substantially. We now work from home and struggle to put to good use all that we already have. This brings me to the second aspect of the move, the healthcare bit. I had had my fair share of experiences with the medical healthcare system. And I was not entirely satisfied with the explanations or the solutions they had to offer. A healthy body, to me, back then felt like an unreliable car, and one never knew when it could break down. To add to this, there was enough circulating in the media about the politics and the ethics of the healthcare system. Around the same time, my paths crossed with the science of nature cure. The rationale of this simple yet powerful body of knowledge hugely appealed to us as a family. It's been over 2 years that we as a family took any medicines or saw any doctors, not even the seemingly benign paracetamol. Nature Cure has allowed us to become our own doctors. We now heal ourselves naturally and feel extremely empowered about being able to do that. We were on a road trip last year, and we were on the road for about 2 months, and we were traveling in remote parts of the country with 2 small kids in tow. It was liberating to know that we did not have to worry about the kids falling sick in a place where we might not be able to access any doctors. Being on the road for 2 months meant that we needed to eat healthy to be able to stay healthy. We also learned to piggyback on roadside joints and dhabas to be able to cook our own food. We were traveling through remote Kutch, and my son had come down with a stomach bug. We needed to get him some coconut water, but I was not sure where in remote Kutch I'd be able to lay my hands on coconut water. I stepped out of my room, And lo and behold, what do I see? I see a coconut tree laden with coconuts. From then on, I also believe that if you want something bad enough, the universe will conspire to make it happen. And this brings me to the third element of the move, the education bit. About education and schooling too, before we left the city, I had started having some skepticism. I felt that our daycares and the day boarding format of schools was not necessarily, I was not very sure if kids were the primary sort of people whose interest these schools and institutions served. I felt they were serving the need of a system that needed kids to stay away from homes, from empty homes till later in the evening. After all, babies were not meant for daycare, and kids came back home in time for lunch not too long ago. Around the same time, my son had been complaining that he felt pushed all the time. He didn't have enough time to do his own thing. He was constantly being told what to do, etc., etc. And I didn't blame him. He came home at 4, and by 8 he was in bed. Between 4 and 8, he needed to play with his friends, bathe, have dinner, do schoolwork if any. Any deviation from his schedule meant disruption. I hated the fact that the busyness of our lives had trickled into the lives of our children, and we were looking to change that. And whilst I don't see myself as a cult homeschooler, we explored homeschooling as an option for our son to be able to give him more flexibility and unstructured time. It's been over 2 years he now homeschools, and it's been a joy learning with him, seeing him learn. It's also given us more visibility and insight into his learning process. As for my daughter, she's her own unique person with her own unique needs. She's extremely social and will chat up a tree for company when alone. She, on the other hand, attends a Tibetan Montessori not too far from home, and her Tibetan Gelas, who are more like experienced grandmothers, regale me of tales of how her day went when I go to pick her up from school. This too is a welcome change from the city schools that I had experienced, where I constantly felt rushed or was conscious to overstay in case I was eating into the teacher's time. And whilst Jahan, my daughter, earlier asked when she would start schooling, she now wants to know when would be her turn to homeschool. The other thing I'd like to talk about were some of the things that this move has helped correct in the context of schooling for the children. Teaching them or talking to them about diversity was a tricky thing to be done in the city when all they experienced were homogeneous spaces. His friends in school came from similar backgrounds. We lived in a neighborhood where our neighbors were people like us with similar economic backgrounds, similar education, etc. There was hardly any authentic chance for genuine crossovers to take place into other ways of living or into other people's lives who were not like us. The move helped correct that. We now have as neighbors Gaddis, who are the nomadic shepherd community of Himachal Pradesh, as our immediate neighbors. And the move also helped autocorrect some of the stereotypes that my son had been building whilst in the city about villagers and village life. Seeing farmers work extremely hard to grow their food in the fields around our house has formed the basis of our discussion on fair trade and equitability. And whilst his friends may not be as good as him in English or fancy board games, they sure know how to chop wood, climb trees, grow their own food much better than him. This has formed the basis of his life lesson that nobody is innately smart or inherently foolish. People get better at what they do, learn and practice. And that this needn't form the basis of one's inferiority or superiority. The mud architecture of the valley allows us to talk about sustainable architecture, sustainability in general. I could go on and on. But I'll suffice by saying that as an anthropologist mother, I could not have been more pleased by the life lessons and other lessons in general that this immersion gives him. During my DPhil research, I lived with the Gonds of central India. The Gonds are Adivasis who live off the land. And then they were displaced and their lands were acquired and they were pushed into daily wage work. With their lands gone, they had to work, which meant they had more money, but they were still somehow more unhappy. And it was only in my own quest for freedom have I fully realized what my Gond friends told me all those years ago as to how displacement had meant a loss of their freedom. The need for freedom, I feel, is an innate human need. That is what my son was asking for in his own childlike way. That is what I was seeking. That is what the Santals of Bengal, with whom I had earlier worked, and more recently the Gaddis, have expressed in some shape and form. I wonder that being in close harmony with nature, living in the back of beyond, cut off from the rest of the world, have these communities maintained their need and sense for freedom better than us in the modern world? The Gonds pride themselves in being called a Ek Bhav people or an egalitarian people. Inequality in their part of the world is at best temporary. Their societies thrive on collaboration. Nobody gets weeded out of the race or left out. As compared to this, the modern world thrives on competition with one's colleagues, peers, friends, neighbors. And I wondered if these societies from the so-called margins, these societies that we feel have somehow lagged behind, could teach us a lesson or two in how to build a more gentle and humane world. Had we lost our connection, had we lost our human-to-human connection in trying to outdo, outshine, show one-upmanship through our lifestyle, fame, money, titles, I was done. And I was seeking freedom from all of this. I did not want any identity markers. I did not want any labels that helped me claim my exclusivity or helped me stand apart. I wanted to lead life with the belief that what one did was incidental to one's interests and preferences and should not form the basis of our interaction or our equity with each other. I feel that in my quest for freedom, the life lessons that I have learned from my Gond friends have precipitated and come together. And from so many miles apart, after so many years, I have rediscovered a new connection and camaraderie, a very silent connection and camaraderie with my Gond friends from the so-called margins. Our quest has just begun, and I don't know how and when it will end, and maybe it never does. For now, we are extremely content that it allowed us to address our churnings, it allowed us to connect to our inner voice and overcome our fears and insecurities. Before I end, there is a certain piece that my son had written. It was an essay inspired by some poem, the name of which I forget. And the title of his essay was Nobodies and Somebodies. I'm going to read out from this piece of paper some excerpts, some thoughts that have come to my mind. While writing the essay, my son struggled to grasp how anybody could be a nobody. After all, everybody was a somebody because they had a body, were living, and even had a name. In other words, for him, a human existence alone qualified everybody to be a somebody. Power and prestige that makes people somebodies or nobodies in our adult world had not yet corrupted him. In wanting my freedom, was I going to go from being a somebody to a nobody? But then, who is a nobody? As my son would ask. Are we all not meant to be somebodies in our own right, just on account of us being human? When we create nobodiness, we uphold ways and norms of the world that actually need to be challenged and questioned. I often ponder how our identities, both acquired and ascribed, have created the nobody, somebody, the us and them divides that come in the way of our innate human goodness. And whilst freedom from my work, freedom to control my geography, freedom to control my time have allowed me to be free, I have actually felt free in letting go of who I am on account of what I do. Thank you.